Welcome back, kiddies, and today we're going to be looking at the one, the only, Disney Fanatic's Precious Blood.
There's only so much that a heart can take before it starts to break.
Though truth be told, ever since Rosie introduced me to her, I've always wanted to review something centered around this Pegasister. The only reason I hadn't so far was because I wanted to touch on one of her smaller stories. However, I had trouble deciding which one would be the best to review. Not that I really think any of her works are bad, but at the same time, the more you read, the more of a pattern with certain tropes you start to notice. Allow this parody song I once sawed up as an explanation. Disney Fanatic, she's a shipper, yes it's true. Disney Fanatic, making her ship so come true. Soaring dash is always her style, pink cheese is super bouncy, buttercord being her biggest thing, an apple spike is OTP. Disney Fanatic, she's one big shipper, it's true. Seriously, if Pinky Rose doesn't do her own adaptation of this, I will be very disappointed. Though with that said, after a while, I kind of always started to feel like she was playing it a little too safe. Again, she can make good love stories, some with various adaptations from other works, but for the most part, what you saw is what you got. If you go into Bride of Discord expecting a good romance story between Fluttershy and Discord, you'll be more than satisfied. However, if you're hoping for something a bit more grand and epic, don't be expecting anything that takes a lot of risk from the norm. So when I first saw this, I was a little nervous and not sure what to expect, but went in optimistic nonetheless. So in this story, we travel to a very Dracula-era world, where the young Duchess Fluttershy is of age to marry, and as you probably expect from these kind of stories, her Aunt Guardian, because parents died trope, played by Starlight Glimmer, wants to marry her off to the wealthiest stallion, while Fluttershy hopes to marry for love. However, her world is turned upside down as one Count Discord spares her life when he falls in love with her at first sight, in a more or less imprinting Destiny singing I'll explain later. And he wants her to be his bride. However, being Fluttershy, she's, well, shy at first, until she slowly starts to fall for him as she gets a taste of true freedom for the first time. Although the problem is that, to love him, would require her to become a blood-hungry vampire that has to kill and eat other ponies, or at least animals, to survive. So while she has to decide if her soul's worth the price of love, another vampire tries to woo her heart, or rather her aunt's pockets, with some much bigger, more diabolical plans on the side. While I was nervous since I never knew DF to try such a story like this, I found myself rather pleased with the end results. You could easily say this was one of her boldest, and certainly longest, works to date, which oddly enough comes down to two things. The first is, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but this story felt, in many ways, what Twilight, is that ever going to get? Much better. And hey, I was able to do something new with this. But yes, I am talking about the Twilight Saga, and how this story feels like an improvement over that one. And being someone who may have had a high school girlfriend and a lot of female family members who were big fangirls of this movie, I've seen it enough times to notice the similarities. And trust me, they're not hard to miss. Though the story also likely has a strong influence from the original Dracula tale, along with the musical and many other vampire fictions. Though the Twilight Saga still stands as a strong influence, with one of the biggest things centered around Applejack and Rarity's vampire backstories, being near identical to Rosalita's. Wow, and hear me out, this Twilight story having parallels to Jacob. Again, hear me out. While very different, both lose their loves to vampires, one because he was killed, the other because she's Bella. Both obsessed over this, and have it out for said vampires, and both end up finding new, unconventional love through supernatural means. Again, a different, but it's possible to see the influences as DF's vampires are able to walk in sunlight. However, instead of something stupid like sparkling, these vampires can't assume their true form. I believe are unable to feed, and are most vulnerable in the sun for a trade-off. And of course you have this story's version of love at first sight. And much like in the Saga's books, only with vampires, you get symptoms of having, say, dreams for the first time. And then there's Fluttershy, who really is the perfect fit for this kind of role, and makes this what I consider one of her best stories. The two biggest conflicts with Fluttershy throughout is being sheltered and controlled by her aunt, and the idea of becoming a blood-hungry vampire for love, which works well because she's both an animal lover and a pony. One of the biggest problems I have with most vampire stories, among other things, is the idea of them drinking blood and being predators. By that I mean, we as humans already eat meat, so why not just raise a bunch of cows or pigs, take a little blood at a time, and in cases of a lover wanting to become a vampire so they can be with their soulmate, what's the big deal if you can get away with animal blood? Though I do get some of the bigger scenes of predator versus prey, rich and poor, tied in with themes such as temptation and greed, since blood isn't really that fulfilling, But in this world's case, you have a setup of a society that isn't carnivorous, and unlike humans, it's likely colonies have never become predators, only not prey. As a result, it kinda makes the idea of becoming something that has to kill to survive much more menacing to Fluttershy. And to be honest, for a while, I thought the only way this story was going to end well was if Twilight found a way to turn them mortal again. First off,
No spoilers!
second, this doesn't happen, and I'm glad for that. But I guess I wasn't the only one to come up with this idea, when we get this line on Star Swirl trying to cure Sunset Shimmer. So, Diep doesn't take the easy route out, and yeah, she's too smart for her own good, but good for her, good for her. So for Fluttershy, it's quite the emotional turmoil, as her Aunt Starlight looks into setting her up with the villain of the story, Count Trenderhoof, which, let's talk about our antagonist for the story really quick. Starlight, for the most part, who, since half this story was written prior to the season 5 finale, starts off as nothing more than a typical overbearing noble with no love in her heart, power and money being her only cares, as she grooms her hair to make more in whatever way the child can be most useful. So at first, I have expected this Starlight to be killed off somewhere near the climax. Though after her reform within the canon, we see Starlight with a not all too shabby transition as she goes from something more of a one-note villain to a more complex character that had once been much like Fluttershy in regards with Sunburst, which makes for some rather emotional scenes later on down the line. And then you get Trenderhoof, who, how did they not know who he was? I'm sorry, but it's one of my biggest gripes. See, in Rarity and Applejack's backstory, it was Trenderhoof, going by the name Travel Hay, who raped and killed them. Okay, easy enough to fool, I guess on its own, but I'm pretty sure he's seen by the other mares, is described by Fluttershy, and they never figure out who he is till the very end. I mean, it's just a minor problem, but it's enough to make me go, how do they not know who he is? It's kind of sort of a audience being smarter than your characters kind of dilemma. But that's really my only complaint. He's still a big threat, plays a not bad substitute for what most others would have written someone like Blue Blood or Jet 7 for, as he plans to take over the world, his regards and manipulations to other mares around him, and makes for a much more fulfilling climax than the Twilight books. Though, for this review's finale, let's talk about the shipping and romance, since, well, to DisneyFanatic's fic, there's no way you can't talk about it. So the first thing I have to bring up is, who isn't honestly shipped? Yeah. Half those shipping tropes I mentioned in my parody song, they're not even in this story. Which for someone who I've seen always try to make sure she fits all of her favorite ships into even the smallest of stories, is really admirable when she realized it would be unwise to try and force certain things into this book. It was even said that she wasn't originally going to have Apple Spike or the anti-Sparity thing going on in this story. However, when she found that it would work well considering that we have two Rosalitas that were defiled by the same stallion, she went with her gut, and honestly gave us one of the best stories with this trope ever. Stands out a lot more because Rarity has a lot more anti-stallion sentiment than just not being interested in Spike, and we have Applejack having imprinted on him without his knowledge. Although, both their motivations and actions feel rather justified, as they both deal with the realities of possibly never seeing their families again. Speaking of, let's talk about Sunlight, which has an irony since they're vampires. Though, as a first try at a different couple, Disney Fanatic does a good job. But it works when you got in the fact Sunset thinks Trenderhoof is her soulmate, and with this being a world that wouldn't see homosexual couples as acceptable. But of course, Fluttercord steals the show, and who can blame them, being the main characters aside. While I still love the Bride of Discord series, I won't lie by saying it kinda plays the Fluttercord ship a little too safely. For the most part. Spoilers, but it gives them both a happy ending, with, when you get down to it, not a lot of struggle and sacrifice. Okay, so at the ending anyways, and Discord isn't the Chaos Lord, but they're still both rather happy, and it works out with nearly no consequences for either of them. However, because it's well executed, it's more than enough to keep the story from feeling bland, and like I said, if you're a romance and Fluttercord fan, you'll find the series enjoyable. However, in this story, with this setup that's presented, there were a lot of times I wasn't honestly sure if it would have a happy ending, or if it did, it would have required a rather large sacrifice on both their ends, no matter which way it went. There wasn't an easy answer, no simple solution, or if there were, it doesn't go that way, which is where I'll probably stop here with that. And I kinda think it built a much stronger bond out of them with all the conflict, which is what I could honestly say about any dark fic, where, even with all the challenges, it's able to put these characters through very trying turmoils to reach the end, and it makes it all the more worth it, most of the time. But it still makes the happier moments shine much brighter than they would have on their own, and I've always known Disney Fanatic as someone who could make a good romance story, but as someone who wouldn't take any big risks, and sure took a lot of them in making this story. And honestly, it pays off beautifully, while still holding all the charm her other works were known for. So even if you're not a fan of vampire romance, which I can't believe has to be considered its own genre now, but do enjoy a good Disney Fanatic story that takes a much darker turn than her other works, I think you're in for a good time.
Unless you love
Though this has sure been a month for me doing all these reviews, stepping outside my comfort zone, to be rewarded with some really good reads. Though, I hope you haven't strained all your eyes with all that. Wouldn't want to start seeing things. Would you?